Hey y'all, I'm Carrie,
Mama.
and this is Monstrous. This episode contains language and topics that may not be suitable for all listeners, and topics that may be triggering to some. Listener discretion is advised. All right, before we get into it, we want to welcome everyone back to a special bonus episode. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, but
This one's a doozy.
this one's fun. Well, it's dark, but it's fun. So today, the day that you're listening to this is St. Patrick's Day. Yesterday, we just dropped our episode on Brittany Drexel. So after that, after our meat shower episode the week before,
Ew.
and our four-part Megan Trussell, I wanted to give you guys something a little bit different for this Tuesday. Normally, you don't hear us on Tuesdays, but it's St. Patrick's Day. So
Where's the green beer and corned beef?
I don't know.
Well, you need to get me some.
You go get some.
No,
I
the
don't drink
young.
beer,
I don't either.
and I don't eat corned beef.
Well, I eat corn. I'll just go get it from the deli where it's sliced thin.
Ugh.
I like it with Swiss cheese.
Ew,
Oh, girl.
that's even worse. It stinks.
And so did both your boys. And I'm kidding. I'm just kidding, folks. I love my great grandsons.
That's so fun. Okay. So while we usually cover modern disappearances and dark mysteries here, today we're going to go back 1,600 years.
Dang, that's older than me.
Well, yeah. We're going to go to a kidnapping that changed the map of the world.
Nice.
So this is a strange shift moving from a modern case like raining meat, Megan Trussell,
I just can't.
and Brittany Drexel to something that happened 16 centuries ago. But if you strip away the history books and the religious titles, Patrick's story begins with the exact same nightmare that we cover every single week. A teenager snatched from his life, forced onto a boat, and essentially erased.
Hell, teenagers nowadays, they'd bring them back. Just kidding, folks.
This is the ultimate cold case, where the victim didn't just disappear. He was completely reinvented.
Whoa.
So, are you ready to learn about the dark history of St. Patrick's Day?
I knew that little sucker was shady.
So, in the year of 401 AD, the coast of Roman Britain was a place of fear. High prowed ships would emerge from the fog, carrying raiders from the island of Hibernia, which is modern day Ireland. Among the chaos of one such raid was a 16-year-old boy named Maewyn Succat. He wasn't a
That was a
hero.
mouthful.
Right. I don't even know if I said it right. I hope I did. He wasn't a hero, and he wasn't a warrior. He was just a kid from a wealthy family who was suddenly forced into a boat, stripped of his status, and sold into bondage. For
Poor
si-
kid.
right, I could not imagine 16. Oh my god. Whew. For 6 years, he lived the life of a ghost. He was a shepherd on the slopes of Mount Slemish, isolated and freezing. In his own later writings, the Confessio, he describes the psychological horror of that time, praying 100 times a day and 100 times at night in the ice and snow, surrounded by a warrior culture whose language he didn't speak and whose rituals of sacrifice were terrifyingly foreign. He was a living ghost, and it was in that hollowed out desperation that he found a voice, or rather, a voice found him. Now, some argue that his eventual vision wasn't just a divine calling, but actually a psychological break born from the trauma of total isolation. Most people know how this story ends, right? The green parades, the shamrocks, the sainthood. But the history of St. Patrick is built on a foundation of kidnapping, religious warfare, and an allegory that covers up a much darker cultural erasure. So we all often think of St. Patrick's Day as a lighthearted celebration of Irishness. But when you peel back the layers of the last 1600 years, you find a story of survival, radical transformation, and some very persistent myths. So we're going to start at the very beginning. The man who, in fact, was not Irish at all. The man who was not named Patrick and technically isn't even a saint. So let's clear the air on the man himself. His birth name was Maewyn Succat. He only became patriarchus, which means father figure or noble, after he earned the priesthood. And that mission was born out of a nightmare. So, after escaping his captors in Ireland and trekking 200 miles back to Britain, he claimed to have had a vision. He saw a man coming from Ireland with countless letters, and he heard the voice of the Irish begging him to come back and walk among them again. He returned around the year 432 AD, and for the next few decades, he was a powerhouse. He founded monasteries, churches, and schools. But if you're looking at his name in the official Vatican list of canonized saints, you won't find it. And that's because in the 5th century, there wasn't a formal process for sainthood. He became a saint by popular acclaim. The people simply decided that his legacy was holy. But that legacy has a bit of a monstrous edge depending on who you ask. So we've all heard the legend. Patrick stood on a hilltop and chased all of the snakes out of Ireland. But Ireland never had snakes. It's an island.
They
The
can still have snakes.
So, Ireland having snakes is actually a common thing that people think, okay? It's one of the most persistent myths out there. But the snakes that St. Patrick drove out weren't actually snakes at all. And that is because the truth is a lot more fascinating than we realize. So, Ireland is one of the few places on Earth, just like New Zealand and Antarctica, that has 0 native snake species.
And that's okay.
So during the last ice age, it was far too cold for reptiles to survive there. And by the time it had actually warmed up enough for them to live there, the land bridges that connected the island to the mainland had melted, which left Ireland the definition of an island. And that happened all before snakes could ever migrate over to Ireland from Europe.
I don't do snakes.
So scientists and geologists have actually searched for decades for proof that snakes were in Ireland, and they have found 0 fossil evidence showing that snakes ever lived there. So there's no fossil evidence to show that they were there 1,600 years ago, and none to show that they were there 10,000 years ago.
If it was, they'd be some awfully old snakes.
All right. So that brings us back to, what did he actually banish? In the medieval symbolism, the serpent was a stand in for paganism and druidry. So the driving out of the snakes that they say St. Patrick did was a poetic way for history to describe the systematic erasure of an ancient Irish culture, ancient Irish laws, and ancient Irish spirituality to make room for a new era. Just a fancy way for history to try to
Spruce it up.
right, exactly. So what he did wasn't bad. So most historians agree the snakes were a metaphor for the indigenous druids and pagans. So when we talk about him driving out the snakes, we're talking about the systematic dismantling of ancient Celtic spiritual practices. For some, it's a miracle of conversion. For others, it's the beginning of a cultural genocide. But we have to remember, not everyone saw Patrick as a savior. To the Druid elite, he was a bringer of a spiritual apocalypse. There's a story about Patrick's return to his former master, a Druid chieftain named Miliuk. So Patrick actually tried to go back to the man who had enslaved him.
I wouldn't.
I know, I don't understand why, but according to my research, basically it was to pay his ransom and to convert him. So to convert his master into his religious believings. But When Myaluk saw the saint approaching with his new strange power, he didn't see a holy man. He saw a monster coming to claim his soul. Miliak was so terrified of being spiritually conquered by his former slave that he gathered all of his treasures into his house, locked the doors, and set the entire place on fire.
Nice guy.
So he chose to burn himself alive in a funeral parade of his own making rather than face Patrick's quote new light. Following this, Patrick reportedly stood on a nearby hill watching the smoke rise in silence. To the old world, the smoke from that house was a signal that their gods were officially dead. And if you think the snakes were the only thing that Patrick was fighting, you have to look at what the earth is still giving up today. So, if you remember back in episode 21, we did a full deep dive into bog bodies. Archaeologists in the Irish peat bogs have found perfectly preserved remains of men and women, like the old Krogan man. And these weren't accidental deaths. These men were victims of what is called the triple death, a ritual sacrifice where the victim was strangled, stabbed, and drowned simultaneously to appease the gods of the land.
That's just wrong.
And they are perfectly preserved because of what's inside the box.
Crazy.
We did that episode early on before Mandy went on her hiatus.
Oh, so that's why I'm all confused.
Yeah, that's why you're like, I don't know what that is. Yeah. But our listeners who have listened that far back and are currently caught up know exactly what I'm talking about. So when Patrick walked onto the island, he wasn't just walking into a new culture. He was walking into a landscape that was quite literally built on the bodies of those that were sacrificed.
Ew.
Mhm. So it's here that the story stopped being a Sunday school lesson and starts looking more like the psychological thrillers that we usually dive into. Because when you talk about driving out snakes that don't exist, you're really talking about the systematic dismantling of people's identity. Patrick wasn't just a priest, he was a disruptor who walked into a world of ancient gods and decided to burn it down. And the tools he used for that burning down were more psychological than we realized they were. So take the shamrock, for example. Today, it's just a cute green doodle, right? But in the 5th century, it was a tool of spiritual replacement. The Druids held the 4-leaf clover as sacred because they believed that it allowed them to see invisible spirits and ward off bad luck. By standardizing the 3-leaf shamrock as the official symbol of the Trinity, Patrick was effectively blinding the population to their old supernatural world. So he wasn't just teaching a new faith, he was systematically rewriting the magic of their land. And as you're about to see, that conflict didn't just stay in Ireland, it followed the Irish all the way across the ocean.
Nice.
So, to understand the weight of this, you have to look at what Patrick was actually up against. The folklore tells us that he didn't just preach, he fought. One of the most terrifying figures of that era was Crom Cruach, a pre Christian deity often described as a bent god of gold and silver, surrounded by 12 stone idols. So legends say that this god demanded heavy sacrifices in exchange for good harvests. Patrick is said to have approached this idol and struck it down with his crosier, literally smashing the old gods into the dirt. To the converts, he was a hero. To those that believed in the old ways, he was a destroyer of the worlds. This wasn't just a physical battle, it was psychological warfare. There is a famous prayer called St. Patrick's Breastplate in its original form. It reads like an incantation, a protection spell meant to guard against the spells of women, smiths, and druids.
What's a druid?
Druids are high ranking, learned le- leaders in ancient Celtic society.
Okay.
They functioned as like priests, philosophers, judges, and educators. They were revered for their wisdom and connection to nature.
Okay.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
They
think.
they provided counsel to like kings, teachings, and practicing medicine, stuff like that. So Kinda like how in ancient Greece they had their oracles, kinda like that.
I got it.
Yeah, similar to that. Okay, okay. He was so he wasn't just inviting people to a new faith, he was casting his own magic to drown out the old ones. Even as the old gods fell, the transition was far from clean. If you look at the walls of some of the oldest Irish churches, you'll find the Shala na gigs,
There's a mouthful.
right? So it's a grotesque stone carving. Sorry, no. These are grotesque stone carvings of female figures that are as raw as they are unsettling. So some scholars think that they are meant to ward off evil, but others see them as the last lingering shadows of the pagan world that the church couldn't quite kill off. So they simply built walls around them. So here, let me show you a picture. Here you go.
That's just wrong. That's just wrong. And that's pornography, early pornography.
In stone form.
I'll never get those images out of my head.
You've seen worse.
The beginning of pornography.
Okay, so these were used
Telling you.
they were protection, right? Okay. So this was a visual reminder that while Patrick brought the light, the ancient, early, earthy, and often frightening feminine power of the land refused to be fully evicted. And then we have the story of Bridget. Long before she was a saint, she was a goddess of the I'm gonna butcher this. Sorry guys. Tu Tuatha de Danann. I think that's probably not how you say it, but that's as good as I can get. So this was the high gods of old Ireland. She was the fire, the poetry, and the smithcraft of the nation. Patrick and the early church realized that they couldn't kill her memory, so they did something perhaps even more monstrous. They absorbed her. They put a nun's habit on a goddess, turned her eternal flame into a covenant candle, and essentially skin suited an ancient deity to make her fit into their new world. It's the ultimate survival story. She's still here, but she's wearing the face that the church gave her. So when we talk about the Druids being driven out, we aren't just talking about a change in religion. We're talking about the erasure of a class of people who were the judges, lore keepers, and the healers of Ireland. Legend, Legends say they could summon magical mists to hide from Patrick's arrival or call down fire from the sky. By framing them as serpents, history essentially turned an entire Jesus Christ, intellectual class into monsters that needed to be exterminated for the good of the soul. There's even a place in Donegal known as St. Patrick's Purgatory on Lough Derg. The legend says the sky opened up and showed Patrick a cave that led directly to the underworld. For over 1,000 years, pilgrims have traveled there to stand in the dark, starving and sleep deprived, hoping to face their own internal monsters. So this eventually evolved into what was known as the Black Fast. It's a grueling period where people would consume nothing but dry bread and water, sometimes for as long as weeks. It was a form of spiritual I can't talk today,
We ate too much.
flagellation that makes our modern fasting look like a feast. And it wasn't just about hunger. For centuries, pilgrims were locked inside a windowless prison chapel for a 24-hour vigil of total sleep deprivation. It was essentially a medieval sensory deprivation tank designed to induce hallucinations of the afterlife. So you weren't just praying to a saint, you were pushing your mind to a breaking point to see if you could survive the shadows. And if the internal demons of purgatory weren't enough, there's the literal war of the mountain. So legend says that while Patrick was fasting on Currag Pat, what the fuck? Yeah, was fasting on Currag Patrick, he was swarmed by demons of the north, spirits taking the form of massive, hideous black birds. So essentially crows. Okay, that's basically he was swarmed by crows.
Hey, crows are mean. Mm.
Legend says that this swarm was so thick, they turned the day into a permanent eclipse. So there was enough crows here to block out the sun. Patrick's prayers didn't work, his tears didn't work, and finally he grabbed his iron bell, the clogged dub, and rang it so violently that it shattered. He eventually Jesus. He eventually threw the bell into the heart of the flock, finally banishing them into the sea. So according to legend, basically this guy broke a bell, threw it at this flock of birds, and all the birds fell into the ocean. That's how I'm taking it. It's the most weirdest thing ever. So this bell actually does exist, by the way. This bell sits in the National Museum. It's made of iron and bronze, but according to folklore, it was originally white, and it only turned its pitch black color because of the demon smoke that it absorbed during that 40-day battle with the demon birds. It's a cursed object hidden in plain sight. Then there's also an old Irish weather phenomenon known as the St. Patrick's Gale or the March Blizzard. So historically, if it snowed on the 17th, it wasn't seen as a bad omen. It was believed to be the saints' way of cleansing the land one last time before the spring truly began. A cold white veil over the island to wash away those winter spirits. But then there's the research of scholars like Dr. Roy Flinchner. Now, we've spent the whole time so far talking about Patrick as a victim of kidnapping, but Dr. Flinchner suggests a theory that challenges that entire narrative. He argues that Patrick might have been a slave trader himself, using people as a form of currency to buy his way into the Irish social structure after fleeing a failing career as a Roman tax collector. It tur-
Sorry, that was funny.
it turns the saint into a potentially much more predatory figure than he's believed to be. So whether he was a runaway or a redeemer, the man who died on March 17th, 461 left behind a footprint that would eventually change the entire world. So, following his death in 461 AD, the way the world remembered Patrick began a slow 1,000-year transformation. For centuries in Ireland, March 17th was a solemn religious feast day. It wasn't a time for parties, it was a day for church in the morning and a modest meal in the afternoon. And if you walked into a celebration back then, it wouldn't have looked green at all. So long before the Emerald Isle became a branding slogan, the color of the saint was actually St. Patrick's blue.
I didn't know that.
Yep. So picture a deep, regal sky blue, the kind that you'd see on the velvet robes of the Order of St. Patrick or the old Irish flags. It was elegant, cold, and strictly formal. Green only became the rebel color during the 1798 Irish rebellion when it was used to literally bleed out the blue of the British backed establishment. The shift to green didn't happen because of nature, it happened because of revolution. Isn't that crazy?
None of this whole thing you've been saying so far makes any sense.
So, because the day almost always falls during the fasting season of Lent, the church eventually allowed a temporary 1 day reprieve from restrictions on eating meat or dancing, which gave the day its first taste of celebration. However, the St. Patrick's Day that we recognize today, so the one with the parades and the seas of green, actually found its footing in America, not Ireland.
Now that I believe.
So, contrary to popular belief, the first St. Patrick's Day parade didn't happen in Dublin.
Happened here.
Yep. Records suggest the first celebration took place in Spanish Florida in 1601. It was then followed by a charitable gathering in Boston in 1737. The turning point for this came in 1762 when Irish soldiers serving in the British Army marched through New York City. For these homesick soldiers, the parade was a way to reconnect with their roots. So, over the next century, as millions of Irish immigrants fled the Great Famine and arrived on Jesus, on American shores, The holiday evolved into a massive display of Irish American identity and political strength. The holiday became a way for a marginalized group to reclaim their dignity in the face of intense bigotry. How wild is that?
That is wild.
So when the I so when the Irish flooded into New York and Boston in the 1840s, they weren't just looking for jobs. They were survivors of a literal apocalypse. The Great Famine had turned Ireland into a graveyard. To understand the scale of this horror, okay, approximately 1 million people died in Ireland,
Dang.
all from the Great Famine, and another million were forced to immigrate to, like, other countries. Many made this journey on what became known as coffin ships. These these were overcrowded, disease-ridden vessels where thousands died in the dark holds, their bodies committed to the Atlantic. They were essentially floating cemeteries. Now, to give you an idea of the visceral reality of these ships, contemporary accounts say that you could often smell a coffin ship before you could ever see it.
Oh, well, yeah, because of decomposition.
Mhm.
I bet that was nasty.
Yeah. The stench
Ew,
of
there ain't enough Lysol in this world.
the stench of typhus, waste, and death would drift miles ahead of the hull, reaching reaching the docks in Quebec and New York like a warning.
And all the ghosts are on there going, "I ain't got nobody."
Stupid.
Am I wrong?
I can't with you. You're so stupid. Okay.
I
Anyway,
get her once in a while.
no. When those survivors stepped onto the pier, they weren't just immigrants. They were the walking wounded.
The Walking Dead, hell.
Yeah. For those who survived the crossing, the nightmare often continued at quarantine stations like Grosse Ile Grosse Ile in Canada. I probably butchered that one too.
That's
I'm
French.
sorry. Either way, it was still located in Canada, even if it is
I'm
French.
just saying,
Oh, I was
it's a
like,
French word.
well, I can't speak French. I'm sorry, guys. I know I butchered
You can
that.
barely speak English, shoot.
I what? Speak better English than you do.
Look, Missy.
Here, thousands more died just within sight of their new life.
Oh, I'm sure because they were so riddled with disease and stuff,
Mhm. So their new life was right there in front of them.
and they went,
Yep. So even today, the land itself remembers that hunger. So in Irish folklore, they speak of An Fear Gorta, or hunger grass. These are patches of grass where someone allegedly died of starvation during the famine. It is said that if you step on this grass, you are struck with a supernatural, insatiable hunger, one that can kill you if you aren't fed immediately.
"Hey, I'm a fat girl. I'm already that way."
This is a chilling reminder that the trauma of the 1840s isn't just in the history books. It's still haunting the very soil of the island.
Oh, I'm sure.
When those survivors marched in those early parades, it wasn't just a party. It was a scream of we are still here to a world that had largely left them to starve. Those parades were an act of defiance against a society that viewed them as contingent or as a burden. Interestingly, though, the traditions that feel ancient are often actually quite modern. So, take the color green, for example. While blue was traditionally the color associated with the saint, green became the symbol of Irish nationalism, like I said, during the 1798 rebellion. Irish soldiers wore green uniforms to distinguish themselves from the British redcoats, giving rise to the phrase, the wearing of the green. You
Now
wear,
that I didn't know.
you wear green on St. Patrick's Day.
Or you get pinched.
Yep. Even the quintessential meal,
One of your boys. Oh,
you better wear green.
I have to hurt him.
You know, because Daxton Wilkins, you better wear
I
green.
know, little turd.
I tell everybody when I was in school, I'd go to school, they'd be like, "Oh, why aren't you wearing green?" My last name is Green. I don't have to wear green.
See, I did the same thing when I was in school.
Yep.
Neener, neener.
That was before I was married, obviously.
Well, duh.
So even the quintessential meal of corned beef and cabbage is an American immigrant story. That's an American thing, not an Irish
I know,
thing.
but I love corned beef and
In
cabbage.
Ireland, are you ready for this?
What do they have, steak and potatoes?
Nope.
Oh,
In Ireland, the traditional
traditional?
celebratory meat was bacon.
Nice.
Yep.
No, well, we like bacon in this house.
Now, when immigrants arrived to New York and they found bacon to be too expensive, they then turned to their Jewish neighbors in the Lower East Side for a more affordable salt cured meat, which was corned beef.
Beef.
Yep. Now, eventually, these Americanized traditions, so the parades, the festive meals, and the secular revelry, were exported back to Ireland. It wasn't until the 1970s that Irish laws were changed to allow pubs to open on March 17th. So this was probably my favorite part, okay? So before the 70s, the day March 17th was so strictly religious that pubs in Ireland were legally required to stay closed. There was one loophole for this, and that was the National Dog Show. Since it was an event, they were allowed to serve. So every March 17th, Dublin was suddenly flooded with thousands of dog enthusiasts who didn't even own a leash. They just liked dogs. So they would flood to Dublin because those were the only pubs open on that day because that is where the National Dog Show is held.
That's dumb.
Yep. Because that is the only time, or that's the only place that they would be legally allowed to serve. So just imagine a guy standing in a suit, nice fancy suit, desperately trying to talk about the pedigree of his golden retriever just so he could get a pint.
Talk about desperate for a beer, and it was hot beer on top of it.
Okay, so now today, the Emerald Isle is celebrated globally with landmarks like the Great Wall of China and the Colosseum glowing green every March 17th as a gesture of international friendship,
Oh, I'd like to see that.
right? The Great Wall of China lit up green. That'd be so cool.
I I was talking about Coliseum.
Oh, yeah, that'd be really cool too. They both would. Okay, and now the Chicago River.
Now, I know they turn it the Chicago River gets turned green every year. That
Yeah.
I do know.
Mhm. Yep, I was getting ready to tell you, I have a secret for you. See if you knew this. The dye
Ha, ha,
they
ha,
u
ha.
because they dye the river green, the dye they use is actually a bright orange red powder. The It only turns that iconic radioactive green that you see once it hits the water and then is churned up by the boats that are in the Chicago River.
What? That now that's weird.
Mhm. They don't actually use green dye. Isn't that odd? That's what I always thought they used. But no. So it's funny when you look at the streets today when it comes to St. Patrick's Day. There's a shift in the green color.
It's more of a,
So for a long time, it was a dark emerald green.
wait, and you can still find a lot of the dark emerald green, like, in decorations and
Right.
stuff like that.
Then in the early 2000s, it was that bright neon green. Now today, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. It's kind of a mixture between the 2.
That they've kind of met in the middle, so to
Right.
speak.
Right. So it seems like even though the color is green, nobody can decide which shade of green it's supposed to be.
It's like, make up your minds.
So this year, the trend is
See, I like the emerald green.
I do too.
I think it's a pretty color.
So this year in 2026, the trend seems to be what's called muted green. That's a forest moss, sage, and like a deep olive green color.
That's not Irish green.
I know. I know.
These people need to get their heads out of their behindies.
So people call it the Celtic Academia or earthy heritage.
Whatever.
Yeah. Mhm. So with all of this, we're finally admitting that this holiday isn't about plastic shamrocks. It's about the moss covered, blood soaked history of an island that refuses to stay buried. But as the holiday went on to become a global brand, it also began to obscure some of the more complex and painful chapters of its history. So while much of the world looks toward Ireland on March 17th, there is another island that shares this public holiday for a much more haunting reason. Monis Mon- Montserrat, is
Montserrat?
that how you say it? I didn't Google, I should have Googled.
Yeah, it's Montserrat.
Okay, I should have done Google pronunciation. Montserrat, a tiny island in the Caribbean known as the Emerald Isle of the West, has a deep Irish heritage stemming from the 17th century exiles. But there's a dark irony that's here. Many of those Irishmen, who had once been victims of British oppression themselves, became the masters on this island. They brought the trauma of their own history and inflicted it upon enslaved Africans.
Aw.
For the people of this island, the date is uniquely double edged. It commemorates both the Irish saint and a massive slave rebellion that took place on March 17th, 1768. The rebellion was strategically planned by enslaved Africans, led by a man named Cujo.
You go, Cujo.
Right. This was to coincide with the feast of St. Patrick. They knew their Irish masters and overseers would be distracted and incapacitated by heavy drinking. The plan was for domestic workers at the government house to seize weapons while others gathered makeshift tools to reclaim their freedom. Tragically, though, the plot was overheard and reported to authorities. The rebellion was crushed, and 9 of their leaders were executed, including Cujo.
Oh,
Today, Mon- how do you say it?
Montserrat.
Montserrat is the only place outside of Ireland where St. Patrick's Day is a national holiday. So we celebrate it here in America.
But it's not a
It's
national
not a
holiday.
national holiday. Ireland and this island is the only 2 places where it is a national holiday.
After they can close everything and get drunk.
But they observe it's not just a one-day observation for this holiday. They observe it through a 10-day festival that honors the struggle for liberation alongside Irish heritage.
That's true.
I thought that was very interesting.
That was very interesting.
Mhm. So they see it as it's a liberation for us, but we also have to honor that Irish heritage that was brought over to us.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's not coming out of my mouth correctly. So this intersection of cultures also brings us to the evolution of folklore, which in my opinion truly is just the funnest part of St. Patrick's Day. Like,
Well,
let's be
of
real.
any holiday. Of any holiday.
Yeah, the
The
folklore and the
folklore of anything, you know, whether true or not,
right.
it just makes it fun. It
Yeah.
really does.
So we're gonna specifically talk about the leprechaun.
I love leprechauns.
Mhm.
They're cute little
So
fellers.
the modern image of that jolly green clad shoemaker is a far cry from the original Irish legends.
Yeah, they were creepy.
In the 8th century, they were known as little bodies or luchoropan, meaning small body, but they were also linked to the abratash. I think is how you say it. This is an this is a legendary Irish dwarf who was said to be undead and rose from his grave to drink the blood of his subjects
A midget vampire
with red hair.
with red hair.
So the abratash is a terrifying piece of lore. And we had not covered this at all yet. So some folklore historians believe that it was actually the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula rather than the usual Eastern European legends.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Mhm. So it's a chilling thought that the world's most famous vampire might have roots in the very soil that Patrick tried to purify.
He lost that round,
It's
did he?
very ironic, isn't it? But this is where the monstrous theme of our show takes its most iconic turn, or no, ironic turn. Because while the Irish were busy telling their stories of blood drinking dwarfs to protect themselves, the outside world was busy turning the Irish themselves into the monsters.
Yeah, they weren't well liked a
No.
long
Oh, no,
time.
they weren't.
When they went to New York, when they migrated to New York, oh, no, they were not well liked at all.
No. I mean, it's just crazy to me. Like, I don't understand.
People are people. I understand that, but they're from a different culture.
Yeah, what does it matter? Who cares?
Yeah, but hey, this is the 21st century. We've
Well, I know
I would
that.
hope that some people have grown up a tad bit.
Well, that could be debated.
Well, yes, I know. I was trying to be nice. But back then, if you weren't
Like, literally the only difference is they have red hair. Like, what
back then, if you weren't Italian or Chinese, and even they got treated bad
in New York
in New York,
specifically or anywhere?
pretty much anywhere on the East Coast. If you weren't
Oh,
Italian, you weren't or German, forget it, you weren't good enough.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Hmm. I wouldn't have been good enough because 'cause I'm a little bit of everything. Well, I maybe.
Yeah, but you're cute, so they'd make an exception for you.
Okay, anyway. So we're gonna move from the spirits in the woods to the much more dangerous monsters that were created by human prejudice.
And that's what I'm talking about.
So it's perfect segue there. Good job. And you didn't even do it on purpose.
No, I didn't.
So think about that. The world's most famous vampire might have had roots in the very soil that Patrick walked on.
Well, maybe he was part Irish.
Maybe. But the leprechaun wasn't the only thing to fear. The most terrifying part of that cultural erasure, when you kill a god, what happens to the energy that's left over? So many folklorists believe that when Patrick destroyed the idols of Crom Cruach, the god who demanded heads as sacrifices, that energy didn't just vanish, it curdled. That's the rumored origin of the Dullahan. The headless horseman isn't just a generic ghost. He's the leftovers of Crom Duba. Because Patrick stopped the ritual decapitations at the stone circles, the god now has to wander the roads, carrying his very own severed head, calling out the names of those whose sacrifice he still owed.
That's just wrong in every sense.
I know, but isn't that it makes you think, doesn't
I don't wanna think about that stuff.
it? So on St. Patrick's Night, if you hear the sound of a whip made from a human spine, it's just a deposed god coming to collect the debt that Patrick canceled.
Well, I ain't Irish, so I ain't worried about it.
I am.
Yeah, but you're cute, though.
And we can't talk about Irish monsters without mentioning none other than the Banshee. She wasn't just a ghost. She was the Bean Sidhe, a woman of the mounds. Now we covered the Banshee in our fairy episode. We covered a couple of these in our fairy episode, and I don't remember if I put that in here anywhere, but I think it was episode 21 where we talked about well, Mandy and I talked about several different.
I was in here for that.
Were you? I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I sat in
Some
on that
very
one.
creepy fairies.
Very
So the Banshee was tied to an old bloodline of the island. To hear her scream on St. Patrick's Night was considered a death sentence for the old families, a sign that the ancient spirits were wailing for the world Patrick was trying to bury. Then there's also the puka.
The who dat?
The puka, Puca, puka.
I know what that is. I
This is
don't
a shape shifting creature that often took the form of a black horse with glowing golden eyes. We covered this one in our fairies episode as well. So while Patrick was busy building churches, the puka was said to be watching from the tree line, waiting to lead travelers off cliffs or destroy the crops of those who didn't leave an offering. Even the symbols of the land have blood on them, like the red hand of Ulster. Legends say that two chieftains raced their boats to the shore to claim the land, and whoever touched it first would own it. One man, seeing he was losing, drew his sword, hacked off his own hand, and hurled the bloody limb onto the beach to touch the land first. It's a grisly reminder that Irish history isn't just about saints, it's about a brutal, uncompromising will to
bunch of
survive.
idiots.
But the most pervasive monster in the Irish mind wasn't the undead king or the shape shifting horse, it was the changeling. This brings our theme of kidnapping full circle, which we also covered this one in our fairy episode. The Irish didn't see the Sidhe as tiny beings with wings. They were ancient, powerful, and predatory. The greatest fear of a parent was that their healthy child would be snatched away and replaced with a changeling, a withered, hungry spirit in a human skin. This folklore led to some of the darkest chapters in Irish history, where parents driven by a monstrous fear would use fire or iron to test their own children, hoping to drive the spirit out and bring their real child back from the mounds. It's that same clever, sometimes cursed survivalism that gives us the legend of Stingy Jack. He was a man so deceitful that he actually tricked the devil into a tree and then made him promise to never take his soul. But when Jack finally did die, he was too sinful for heaven and he was too clever for hell.
What do you do? Just roam the earth?
He was rejected by both, forced to wander the dark between worlds with nothing but a hollowed out turnip and a single ember from the fires of hell to light his way. It's the or it's the origin of the jack-o'-lantern and a reminder that in this culture, the most dangerous thing isn't always the monster. Sometimes it's the man who thinks he can outsmart them. So that's the legend of where jack-o'-lanterns come from.
I like jack-o'-lanterns, though.
Then, if you want to talk about true disappearances, you can look no further than the Lugaramia,
Who, the what?
the Lug, the Harima, yeah, the Harima, the vanishing lake of County Antrim. For centuries, people have reported this lake simply vanishing overnight, leaving behind a barren landscape. On stormy nights near St. Patrick's Day, legend says a ghostly carriage pulled by horses can be seen racing across the water that isn't there. The echoes of a colonel and his men who tried to cross the lake in 1898 and were swallowed by the deep. They simply vanished, leaving only behind a legend in their wake. And even as the old world was being paved over, the voices of the past lingered. There's a haunting poem from the 19th century called The Lament of the Old Woman of Bree. She was once a goddess or a high queen of the old ways. But in the poem, she's an old woman watching the new Christian world rise as her own power fades. She laments the loss of her youth and her gods, describing the incoming tide of the new religion as a cold flood that drowns the warmth of the old island. It is the literal voice of a monster or a goddess being forgotten by history. One of the oldest legends involves these creatures. Then, what was then considered water spirits trying to drag a sleeping king into the ocean to drown him.
Nice spirits.
They were the shadows in the surf, the things that lived where the land ended. So before they were selling us breakfast cereal and green top hats, these creatures were the stuff of nightmares. Undead kings and vengeful spirits that you didn't just want to find a pot of gold from. You wanted to stay as far away from them as possible. And if you think the grumpy green leprechaun is bad, you haven't met their cousin, the the Clurichion. No, the Cluricon. There we go. In Irish lore, these were basically the monsters of the wine cellar.
Well, I don't drink wine, so I ain't worried about it.
They were permanently intoxicated, surely. And if you treated them poorly, then they would wreck your house, sour your milk, and haunt your family.
So make sure you have plenty of wine, keep them happy.
They were the darker, chaotic reflection of that jolly stereotype that we see everywhere today. Okay. So we've covered, let me see, what have we covered so far? We've covered the history of St. Patrick and that he was not actually named Patrick. He was not actually a saint, but he was a total bad guy. We've covered leprechauns, the headless horseman,
Banshee,
changelings, covered a little,
pukas.
yep, the pukas. So the color green and how it was originally blue. So we've covered a little bit of everything. So now we're going to go to parades.
Oh, Lord.
Yep. Because who doesn't love a good St. Patrick's Day parade?
I'd rather stay home.
So while New York and Dublin
I
fight
just don't.
over,
And you know me, I don't do people.
right, right. So while New York and While New York and Dublin fight over who has the biggest parade, there's a much funnier battle going on for who has the shortest.
We do.
Because, Irish people are said to be short. Leprechauns are short.
We do. You know why? That's Daxie. He's a parade in himself.
So for years, a village in Ireland called Dripsy held that record with a parade that was only 77 feet long. It literally went from the front door of one pub, which was Lee Valley Inn, to the front door of the next one, which was called the Way Inn. Today, though, Hot Springs, Arkansas keeps the tradition alive with a 98-foot parade on Bridge Street. So today, Hot Springs, Arkansas keeps the tradition alive with a 98-foot parade on Bridge Street.
Oh, that's cool.
It's proof that sometimes the celebration is just an excuse to get to the front of the line at the bar.
I can see that.
So during the 19th century, St. Patrick's Day in America was often a flashpoint for bigotry rather than a party. Net, I know how to say this word, but my brain, nativists, nativist, is that right? I feel like that's wrong. That's how it's spelled, but I feel like that's wrong. Nativist, that's not how you say that. Nativist,
Native.
there we go. My brain was, and I'm like, that's not how you fucking say that.
It's a long A, not a short A.
Nativist groups use the holiday to mock Irish immigrants through patty making. This involved hanging offensive effigies of Irishmen dressed in rags with whiskey bottles around their necks.
Oh,
hmm These patty effigies weren't just simple rag dolls, they were designed to be grotesque. So these mobs would dress them in tattered clothes, smear them with dirt, and often place them in high public places like steeples or rooftops so the entire town would be able to see them at sunrise. It was a form of psychological warfare, again, turning a human being into a literal monster for the public to jeer at. Media portrayals by famous cartoonists frequently depicted the Irish as subhuman or violent. These harmful 19th century stereotypes are actually the root of many tropes that we still see today, such as the fighting Irish or the caricature of the drunken reveler. And these tropes carry a very heavy weight. Today, over 31 million Americans, which is about 9% of the population, have a claim to Irish ancestry. That is nearly 6 times what the actual population of Ireland is itself. When we use this holiday as an excuse for the fighting Irish caricature or binge drinking jokes, we are playing into the exact same monstrous stereotypes that were used to keep those 1 million famine survivors in the slums over a century ago. So even the traditions that we find fun today have roots in these old tensions. The custom of pinching people who don't wear green is a purely American addition to the folklore. The legend says that wearing green makes you invisible to leprechauns who would otherwise pinch you. So humans started pinching their friends as a reminder to stay hidden from the spirits. But it also served as a way to enforce the display of Irish pride during times when being Irish was socially dangerous. So the pinching was developed here in America. Yeah. So beyond the myths and the politics, the day remains a massive display of cultural endurance. From the Chicago River turning emerald to the Irish Prime Minister presenting a bowl of shamrocks to the US President, which is a tradition that began in 1952.
oh, really? I didn't know that.
I didn't either. The holiday has become a symbol of international ties. It is a day that transcended from a quiet religious fast to a global stage for Irish identity, surviving through centuries of suppression, famine, and migration. So, to wrap up the history of this day, we have to look at the symbols that define the nation itself, starting with the harp. So, Ireland is actually the only country in the world that uses a musical instrument as its national emblem.
That's weird. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Mm,
I didn't even know like the harp had anything to do with Ireland.
I didn't either.
Yep. In ancient Gaelic society, harpers were elite figures, second only to kings, acting as the keepers of history and genealogy. Right?
Well, what do you know?
This prestige made the instrument a threat to those who wanted to suppress Irish culture. So during the 16th century, Queen Elizabeth I reportedly ordered her subjects to hang the harpers and burn their instruments because the music was seen as a powerful tool for inciting rebellion.
Harp music's pretty, I don't see how that happens.
Right. You wouldn't think that it would be a symbol of that.
Uh-uh.
So even the modern use of the harp has a bit of a legal twist to it. So in 1862, Guinness trademarked the harp symbol for their brewery. That's 60 years before the Irish Free State was even formed. So when the government finally wanted to use the harp as their official seal in 1922, they were in a legal bind to do so because it had been trademarked. So to avoid a lawsuit from the brewery, the state had to face their harp in the opposite direction of the one that a harp is usually facing.
See, a harp usually faces the round part towards you that slopes down this way.
Their national symbol is the other way around.
Oh, well.
So they still have the harp,
But it's backwards.
but they don't face legal backlash because Guinness trademarked the harp. Mhm. Okay, so to this day, the Guinness harp faces right. You're looking at it, it faces right, while the official state harp faces to the left, like you just described. So that spirit of resistance is also found in the music that has become the soundtrack of St. Patrick's Day. So for century, Irish music survived in secret hedge schools and rural homes passed down orally when formal Irish education had been banned. So at one point, even the Irish language was a crime. Their native language is a crime. What does that sound like? Does that sound familiar?
Sounds stupid.
That's what they did to the Indians. What Americans did to the Indians.
I know, but it still
Yep,
sounds stupid.
yep. Awfully familiar. History likes to repeat itself, people. How about we learn from it? Just saying. Put that out there into the ether. Okay, anyway. So to speak it or teach it was to risk your own life. These hedge schools weren't just classrooms. They were acts of rebellion under the open sky. This led to the tradition of the session, informal gatherings in homes or pubs where musicians played in a circle. It wasn't about a performance for an audience, it was about maintaining a community. Instruments like the Julian pipes, which are operated by the elbow and are considered some of the most complex in the world, and the bodhran, a frame drum originally used as a grain sieve on farms, became the heartbeat of a culture that refused to stay silent. So, as we look at the global greening of the world today, from the Great Wall of China to the Sydney Opera House, it is easy to forget the grit behind the celebration. St. Patrick's Day has evolved from a prisoner survival story to a quiet religious feast, a tool for political strength in America, and finally, a global festival of heritage. It is a day that holds the memory of the, how do you say it? What?
Montserrat?
Montserrat rebellion and the resilience of a people who turned a symbol of rebellion into a symbol of pride. So, what
My, I think we're getting a
I
thunderstorm.
think so. So whether you're heading to a parade, eating corned beef, watching for your leprechaun, or just wearing a bit of green to avoid a pinch, remember that you're participating in a history that is 1600 years in the making. One that is much more complex and much more monstrous than it appears on the surface.
Yeah, and he pinches hard.
Mhm. And that's our bonus episode. Isn't that wild?
Faith and Begorra.
I told you the history of St. Patrick's Day is crazy. It's not a simple legend.
Some of the prejudices are dumb.
It's wild. Yeah, I thought that would be fun for the holiday, a little bit more lighthearted than normal.
Yeah, because the last few we've had have been kinda
Mhm. Yeah, it's fun.
the Megan one just
Yep, that's it. You got anything?
watch out for leprechauns.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for our special bonus episode, Monstrous this week. We'll be back Monday for our regular scheduled episode. We hope you learned something from this one, and
Or
maybe
have a little fun with it.
right, because this one was a little ugh. And then maybe you might look at this drunken holiday a little differently.
Won't be drunk in here.
Right. And that's all we have. So, as always, we hope you keep listening and remember to
Watch out for monsters.
and don't kill people. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.